You wake up each morning, follow the rules, pay your taxes, work hard, and try to be a good person. But what if these standards are designed to hold you back? This is the provocative perspective Friedrich Nietzsche offered, and it's why his ideas still unsettle authorities today. In this video, we explore how Nietzsche's concepts of master and slave morality reveal the hidden power dynamics shaping our society. Understanding his philosophy isn't just academic. It equips you to see how powerful institutions maintain control through moral frameworks we rarely question. Stay tuned to uncover these hidden dynamics. The will to power, Nietzsche's core idea. What if everything you've been told about human motivation is wrong? Psychology says we seek happiness. Religion tells us we crave salvation. But Nietzsche saw something deeper, a fundamental drive he called the will to power. Imagine it as a river carving its path through the landscape, shaping everything in its way. This isn't about physical strength or political domination. It's about our basic need to grow, overcome, and assert our influence on the world around us. Consider how this reshapes our understanding of human behavior. Most systems, from schools to workplaces, operate on the assumption that people want security, comfort, or approval. Yet Nietzsche argues we're wired to seek challenges that let us test and expand our capabilities. This explains why people climb mountains instead of staying home, or why artists keep creating rather than relaxing. The will to power is our drive to shape our environment, not just survive in it. This drive also disrupts the norm in creative pursuits. Schools that want obedient students, corporations that want predictable workers, and religions that want faithful followers, none benefit from people who see self-overcoming as their primary drive. These systems often discourage ambition that doesn't serve their purposes. Workplaces label employees disruptive when they challenge processes, and schools call curious students difficult. These aren't mere personality conflicts, they're power struggles. The will to power challenges moral systems built on self-denial. When religions preach humility or political movements demand sacrifice, they're trying to redirect this fundamental drive. Nietzsche saw this as psychological manipulation. By making people feel guilty for their natural ambition, institutions channel that energy into serving external goals rather than personal growth. In modern self-help culture, this tension is evident. Business gurus talk about crushing goals and dominating your field, crude versions of Nietzsche's concept. Meanwhile, corporate structures work to contain that energy within predictable career ladders. This results in friction between individual ambition and organizational control. Driven people often clash with management or burn out because their will to power exceeds the system's capacity to contain it. Even personal relationships reflect this dynamic. Friendships form around shared interests, but often dissolve when one person grows beyond the group. Romantic relationships struggle when one partner develops faster than the other. These aren't just personal failures, they're manifestations of the will to power in daily life. We naturally seek relationships that help us grow and often move on when they no longer serve that purpose. The most radical part of Nietzsche's idea is that even moral behavior stems from this drive. When we help others, part of us enjoys demonstrating our capacity to give. When we follow rules, we're asserting our ability to control ourselves. Even acts of self-sacrifice can be ways to prove our strength of character. This doesn't make morality fake. It just means our motivations are more complex than we admit. Modern psychology has caught up with parts of this insight. Research on intrinsic motivation shows people perform best when they feel autonomous and challenged. Studies on leadership reveal that influence matters more than rewards. Yet, these scientific findings are often diluted before reaching mainstream culture. The full implications are too disruptive. If people truly embrace their will to power, they might stop accepting limitations imposed by others. In essence, the will to power is like a river, constantly flowing and reshaping the terrain of our lives. It challenges the structures that seek to contain it, whether in schools, workplaces, or personal relationships. By understanding this drive, we can better navigate the complexities of human motivation and perhaps carve our own paths more deliberately. Master versus slave morality exposed. Why do we call humility a virtue and ambition a vice? Nietzsche saw this as evidence of a power struggle hidden within morality itself. He distinguished between two types: master morality and slave morality. Master morality values strength, pride, and nobility, traits of the powerful. Slave morality praises humility, pity, and meekness, qualities that help the weak survive. The key difference lies in who benefits from these values. Historically, this shift began when early Christian values overturned Roman aristocratic ideals. Romans admired courage and conquest, while Christians celebrated the meek inheriting the earth. Nietzsche called this a slave revolt in morality, a psychological shift where the weak redefined what society considered good. This change is mirrored today in modern politics, where debates often frame the powerful against the oppressed. Media narratives celebrate victims and vilify the successful, and social movements position themselves as morally superior underdogs, fighting against privileged groups. Guilt and pity serve as powerful tools of control within slave morality. Guilt ties every wrong action to a blamable agent, creating psychological leverage. If people feel guilty for their success, they can be controlled. Advertising exploits this by implying you're a bad parent if you don't buy certain products. Political campaigns suggest prosperity comes at others' expense. Pity elevates compassion to the highest virtue, creating moral obligations. The suffering gain power over the comfortable by making help a duty rather than a choice. This transforms relationships into power dynamics, where the pitied gain control through their neediness and helpers become trapped by their own virtue. Institutions naturally favor slave morality because it maintains stability. Schools teach children to value cooperation over competition. Workplaces reward team players over strong individual contributors. Religious groups praise self-sacrifice more than self-actualization. These patterns persist because they serve the system's need for predictable, manageable behavior. Consider how society treats ambitious people. We call them ruthless or selfish when they prioritize their goals. Meanwhile, we celebrate those who downplay their abilities and put others first. Nietzsche would argue this isn't accidental. It's how systems neutralize potential threats. By making humility virtuous, they discourage people from becoming too independent or powerful. The language of equality also reflects slave morality. When we say everyone deserves equal outcomes regardless of effort, we're applying the slave's logic, denying natural differences between people. Nietzsche saw this as another form of resentment, where the weak try to drag everyone down to their level rather than rising up. This explains why meritocracy often faces backlash. It threatens the moral superiority of those who benefit from equal outcomes. Modern social media amplifies these dynamics. Virtue signaling allows people to gain status through displays of moral superiority rather than actual achievement. Cancel culture operates on slave morality principles. The weak band together to tear down the strong. Online mobs form around shared resentment against anyone perceived as too successful or independent. Even self-help advice often promotes slave morality. We're told to be grateful for what we have rather than striving for more. Therapists encourage accepting limitations rather than overcoming them. While these approaches have value, Nietzsche would argue they've become tools for maintaining complacency. When society pathologizes ambition as workaholism or perfectionism, it's protecting itself from disruptive individuals. The most insidious part is how slave morality internalizes itself. We don't just follow these values, we believe them. People genuinely feel guilty for wanting more than others have. We criticize ourselves for being too ambitious or not humble enough. This self-policing makes external enforcement unnecessary. The system maintains control because we've adopted its values as our own. Nietzsche traced this back to what he called the free will thesis, the false idea that we're completely self-determined. Moral systems use this concept to hold people responsible for circumstances beyond their control. If you're poor, it's because you didn't work hard enough. If you're unhappy, you're not trying to be positive. This justifies inequality by framing it as moral failure rather than systemic reality. Similarly, the transparency of the self-thesis assumes we fully understand our own motives. Slave morality uses this to police thoughts as well as actions. We're expected to have pure intentions behind every good deed. Any hint of self-interest taints the virtue. This creates impossible standards where even helping others becomes suspect if you might benefit too. The death of God and its consequences. When Nietzsche declared God is dead, he wasn't celebrating atheism. He was observing something far more unsettling. The Christian God was no longer the central pillar holding up European morality and meaning. Imagine removing the load-bearing wall from a house. The entire structure becomes unstable. That's what Nietzsche saw happening to society. The crisis goes deeper than losing religious belief. For centuries, God provided answers to life's biggest questions: why we exist, how we should live, what gives life purpose. Without that anchor, people face a terrifying emptiness. Nietzsche described this as nihilism, where the highest values devalue themselves. The standards for judging good and evil lose their weight, creating a vacuum where nothing seems to matter. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human psychology. When traditional religion declines, people don't stop needing meaning. They transfer that need elsewhere. Political ideologies, social movements, and consumer culture start taking on religious qualities, providing new answers to existential questions with the same certainty religion once offered. Consider modern politics. Political rallies resemble church congregations with their own doctrines and excommunications. Activists speak with missionary zeal, and debates become moral crusades rather than policy discussions. These secular belief systems fill the void left by religion, often replicating its worst aspects: dogmatism, intolerance of dissent, and demands for absolute commitment. The same pattern appears in consumer culture. Brands position themselves as sources of identity and purpose. Lifestyle gurus promise enlightenment through productivity hacks or minimalist living. Fitness cultures develop near-religious devotion. These aren't just marketing strategies, they're attempts to satisfy the human need for meaning that religion once addressed. The products change, but the psychological mechanism remains the same. Science faces this paradox too. The values that drove the scientific revolution, honesty, courage in seeking truth, ultimately undermined the idea of absolute truths themselves. The more we learn, the less certain we become, leading to what Nietzsche called the destruction of their own foundations. The tools we use to understand the world end up showing us how little we can truly know. Institutions rush to fill this void because chaos threatens their existence. Schools can't function if students question why they should learn. Governments struggle if citizens don't believe in shared values. Corporations fail if workers don't accept the system's rules. So they all develop their own secular religions, complete with rituals, sacred texts, and high priests. The morning stand-up meeting replaces morning prayer. The corporate mission statement becomes the new creed. This explains why modern ideological battles feel so intense. When politics or social issues take on religious significance, compromise becomes heresy. Debate turns into holy war. People invest their entire identity in these secular belief systems because, consciously or not, they're seeking the meaning and purpose religion once provided. The stakes feel eternal because they're filling an existential void. Nietzsche saw the Greeks as models for facing this crisis. Before Plato, they created meaning through art, tragedy, and philosophy without needing absolute truths. They could stare into life's chaos and still affirm it. This became impossible after Socrates and Plato introduced the idea that truth and goodness were absolute and knowable. Christianity later inherited this framework, and now we're dealing with its collapse. The danger isn't losing God, it's what we replace God with. Nietzsche warned about the last men, people who would create small, comfortable lives to avoid facing the abyss. They'd distract themselves with petty pleasures and shallow beliefs rather than confront the terrifying freedom of creating their own values. Sound familiar? It describes much of modern culture, from binge-watching to performative activism to obsessive careerism. But here's the opportunity Nietzsche saw. The death of God forces us to grow up morally. Children need parents to tell them right from wrong. Adults must decide for themselves. Similarly, humanity can no longer rely on divine authority for morality. We have to take responsibility for creating values that enhance life rather than deny it. This is both terrifying and exhilarating, like a tightrope walker realizing there's no net, but also no limits. The crisis creates a crossroads. One path leads to passive nihilism, believing nothing matters, so why try? The other leads to active nihilism, recognizing no inherent meaning, so we must create our own. The first path ends in despair or distraction. The second begins the journey toward what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, someone strong enough to face this truth and still affirm life. The Übermensch, threat to the status quo. What if the most dangerous person isn't the criminal or rebel, but someone who chooses their own path, like a traveler who charts their own course instead of following a map? Nietzsche called this person the Übermensch, someone who creates their own meaning rather than accepting society's. This idea challenges systems that control how people think. The Übermensch follows rules by choice, not obedience. This changes why people act. Most follow norms to avoid judgment or gain approval. The Übermensch acts on personal principles developed through self-examination, making them unpredictable to systems that manipulate behavior with rewards and punishments. Modern education exemplifies how institutions discourage independence. Schools prioritize standardized testing over critical thinking. Students memorize answers instead of questioning assumptions. When a child asks, "Why do we have to learn this?" they're often met with authority-based responses like, "Because it's required." These answers reinforce obedience over understanding. Curious students are labeled disruptive because their questions challenge the established order. Corporate culture extends this further. Companies reward employees who conform to dress codes and communication styles. Promotions often go to team players rather than original thinkers. Organizations need predictable behavior to function efficiently, but this stifles individual expression. Workers suppress ideas that might rock the boat, creating environments where innovation happens despite the system, not because of it. The backlash against nonconformists reveals how deeply institutions fear true independence. Employees who challenge policies face marginalization. Students who think differently are diagnosed with behavioral disorders. Even in creative fields, originality is diluted by focus groups and market research. The message is clear: conform or face consequences. This conditioning starts young and continues throughout our careers. making most people internalize these limits without realizing it. Social media adds another layer to this control. Platforms encourage performative identities rather than authentic selves. People craft online personas based on what gets likes and shares, not what reflects their true values. Algorithms reward conformity to trending opinions, creating echo chambers where deviation is punished with silence or outrage. This digital environment trains users to seek external validation rather than develop internal conviction. Nietzsche saw this pattern centuries before social media existed. He recognized how institutions use morality, tradition, and social pressure to maintain control. The Übermensch represents the alternative, someone who withstands these pressures to define themselves on their own terms. This doesn't mean reckless rebellion, but conscious self-creation. Where most people absorb values from their environment, the Übermensch examines each belief to determine if it serves their growth. This process threatens power structures because it's contagious. When one person starts thinking independently, it gives others permission to do the same. History shows how quickly systems can unravel when enough people stop accepting imposed values. That's why authorities throughout history have persecuted free thinkers, from Socrates to Galileo to modern whistleblowers. The crime isn't what they believe, but that they dare to believe differently at all. The workplace provides concrete examples of this dynamic. Corporate mission statements often include values like innovation and creativity, but in practice, these usually mean small improvements within established boundaries. Truly original ideas frequently get rejected as too risky or not how we do things here. Employees learn that real innovation means suggesting minor tweaks, not fundamental changes. This maintains the status quo while giving the illusion of progress. Education systems show similar contradictions. Schools claim to teach critical thinking, but curricula often present information as settled truth rather than ongoing inquiry. Students rarely encounter competing interpretations of historical events or scientific theories. This creates the false impression that knowledge is fixed rather than evolving. The system produces graduates who can analyze data but hesitate to challenge underlying assumptions. The journey of self-definition is like forging a sword in fire. It requires facing intense heat and pressure to shape one's true self. The Übermensch cuts through illusions by asking fundamental questions. What do I truly value? What meaning do I want my life to have? These questions can't be answered by looking outward at what society rewards. They require turning inward to examine one's authentic desires and convictions. This introspection threatens any system that relies on people accepting prefabricated purposes. Nietzsche's ideal challenges the modern cult of busyness. Many fill their lives with activity to avoid facing these deeper questions. Workaholism, constant entertainment, and compulsive productivity serve as distractions from the freedom of defining oneself. The Übermensch rejects this avoidance, choosing instead to confront the discomfort of self-creation. Why authorities fear Nietzsche today? Nietzsche's ideas have faced systematic suppression and distortion since his death, revealing their threat to power structures. The most infamous example is the Nazi appropriation of his work. They selectively edited his concepts, like the will to power, to justify racial superiority and militarism, positions Nietzsche explicitly rejected. His critiques of German nationalism and anti-Semitism make this appropriation particularly dishonest, yet it created a lasting association between his philosophy and fascism that still clouds his reputation today. Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, his sister, played a crucial role in this distortion. After Nietzsche's mental breakdown, she controlled his unpublished works, editing them to align with her anti-Semitic views. She invited prominent Nazis to her brother's archive, fostering connections between his philosophy and their movement. This manipulation continued until her death in 1935, shaping early interpretations of Nietzsche's work. The result was a version of his philosophy stripped of nuance and radical individualism, repackaged to serve agendas he would have despised. Modern academia marginalizes Nietzsche in subtler ways. Philosophy departments often treat him as a literary figure rather than a serious thinker. His works are categorized under continental philosophy, sometimes dismissing him as unscientific or irrational. Required reading lists include fragments of his work stripped of context, making him appear more nihilistic than he was. This academic sidelining ensures most students encounter Nietzsche through second-hand interpretations rather than engaging directly with his texts. Censorship extends to education and media. School curricula rarely include Nietzsche, except as a historical footnote to Nazism. When his ideas appear in popular culture, they're simplified into cliches about might making right or God being dead. The complexity of his thought is reduced to sound bites, making easy targets for criticism. Publishers release Baudelarized versions of his works, removing controversial passages about morality and power, softening aspects of his philosophy that challenge conventional thinking. The corporate world neutralizes Nietzsche's ideas by co-opting terms like will to power while emptying them of meaning. These watered-down versions promote individual achievement within corporate structures rather than genuine self-overcoming. Company retreats might feature Nietzsche quotes about overcoming obstacles, but never his critiques of herd mentality or slave morality. This selective adoption turns radical concepts into tools for maintaining employee productivity and conformity. Postmodernism's relationship with Nietzsche reveals similar contradictions. Thinkers like Foucault and Derrida draw heavily on his critiques of absolute truth and objective morality, yet often avoid his emphasis on individual sovereignty. This cherry-picking shows how even philosophies claiming to deconstruct power resist Nietzsche's most challenging conclusions. His ideas inherently disrupt frameworks, attempting to contain them. Religious institutions suppress Nietzsche for obvious reasons. His critique of Christianity as life-denying strikes at the heart of religious authority. Churches rarely engage substantively with his arguments about moral systems as power structures, dismissing him as immoral or dangerous. This avoidance demonstrates how effectively Nietzsche's philosophy exposes the psychological mechanisms behind organized religion. The tech industry presents a fascinating case study in attempted co-option. Silicon Valley billionaires reference Nietzsche when discussing transhumanism or breaking conventional rules, but ignore his warnings about mass culture and homogenized thinking. This selective reading allows them to claim philosophical justification for disruption while avoiding Nietzsche's critiques of the systems they're creating. Psychotherapy approaches show another form of resistance to Nietzsche's ideas. While modern psychology acknowledges his influence, mainstream therapy emphasizes adjustment over transformation. The goal becomes helping people function better within existing systems rather than questioning those systems fundamentally. Nietzsche's call for self-creation and value determination gets reduced to self-esteem exercises and coping strategies, neutralizing his philosophy's transformative potential. Political movements across the spectrum struggle with Nietzsche for different reasons. The left resists his critique of equality as a leveling force that inhibits exceptional individuals, while the right balks at his rejection of nationalism and traditional morality. Neither side can fully embrace a thinker who undermines all universal value systems, including their own. This bipartisan discomfort confirms how Nietzsche's philosophy transcends conventional political categories, unsettling established ideologies. The advertising industry adapts Nietzschean concepts to reinforce consumer mentality. Ads invoke ideas like self-overcoming to sell products, turning radical individualism into just another lifestyle choice. Will to power becomes will to purchase. The Übermensch is rebranded as the ideal consumer rather than the self-determined creator. These commercial distortions protect economic systems by channeling Nietzsche's transformative energy into harmless consumer behaviors, using Nietzsche to see through modern control. Advertising sells inadequacy. Look at commercials for beauty products, luxury cars, or fitness programs. They highlight your supposed deficiencies, sending a clear message: you aren't enough as you are. This mirrors how religion once used guilt to control behavior, now replaced by ads using insecurity. Emotional advertising works better than factual appeals because it bypasses rational thought. That 90% fat-free label isn't just information, it's manipulation, making you feel good about choosing something you've been conditioned to want. Nietzsche would recognize this power dynamic, akin to religious morality with different priests. Have you ever wondered who profits when you feel inadequate? Political rhetoric operates similarly. Campaigns often frame opponents as moral threats rather than debating policies. Politicians use words like fight and struggle, positioning themselves as defenders of the victimized, playing on resentment, exactly what Nietzsche described in Slave Morality. Research shows negative campaigning works because fear mobilizes people better than hope. When a politician claims their opponent will destroy the country, they're not presenting facts. They're triggering the US versus them instinct that has fueled moral systems for centuries. The tactics have modern packaging, but the psychological levers are ancient. What happens when fear becomes the primary motivator in politics? Social media algorithms amplify this effect. Platforms don't just show you content, they reflect your existing biases. The Pew Research Center found these echo chambers reinforce misinformation because people only see what aligns with their views. This creates new moral codes overnight. A tweet can spark mass outrage before facts emerge. Cancel culture shows how quickly online communities enforce norms, often without nuance. The Journal of Communication found social media amplifies moral outrage because outrage drives engagement. It's not about truth, it's about dopamine hits from tribal belonging. Nietzsche warned about herd mentality, but even he couldn't predict how technology would weaponize it. How often do you question the content you consume online? These systems share a core strategy. They discourage critical thinking. Ads present desires as needs. Politics replaces debate with moral posturing. Social media rewards reactivity over reflection. All three rely on emotional triggers rather than reasoned choice. They're designed to make you act, not think. This is why Nietzsche insisted on questioning every value. He didn't oppose morality, he opposed unexamined morality. Slave morality worked because people accepted its premises without scrutiny. Modern manipulation works similarly. Recognizing these patterns is the first step to resistance. When an ad makes you feel inadequate, ask who benefits. When a politician frames opponents as evil, question what they're distracting from. When social media outrages you, pause before sharing. These systems rely on speed. React now, think later. Nietzsche's approach reverses that. Slow down. Analyze. A study on media literacy found people who question emotional appeals make better decisions. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. What if you took a moment to think before reacting? Conscious value creation is the alternative. Instead of absorbing values from ads, politics, or trends, define what matters to you. This doesn't mean rejecting all external influence. That's impossible. It means choosing which influences to accept. Nietzsche's Übermensch creates values through self-examination, not social pressure. In practice, this could mean unsubscribing from emails that trigger impulse buys, fact-checking political claims before sharing them, or curating your social media to include challenging perspectives. Small actions disrupt the manipulation cycle. Advertising's framing effect reveals how language shapes perception. The same product described as 10% fat versus 90% fat-free triggers different reactions despite identical content. Political rhetoric uses similar tricks. Tax relief sounds compassionate. Tax cuts for the wealthy sounds selfish. Both describe the same policy. Social media does this through headlines designed to provoke. Recognizing these patterns lets you see past the framing to the actual substance. The key is noticing emotional manipulation. Ads use nostalgia, fear of missing out, or social approval. Politics uses fear of change or promises of restoration. Social media uses outrage and belonging. All three bypass logic by targeting feelings first. Nietzsche's insight was that morality always did this. It just called the feelings virtues. Modern systems dropped the moral language but kept the technique. How can you ensure your decisions are truly your own? Research shows people in echo chambers become more extreme in their views. Algorithms feed this by showing increasingly polarized content. The solution isn't abandoning platforms, but diversifying inputs. Follow people who disagree with you. Read sources outside your usual range. Nietzsche's ideal thinker seeks tension, not comfort. Growth happens at the edges of your beliefs, not the center. Nietzsche's most dangerous idea is that you can question everything. The systems shaping your thoughts want you to believe morality is fixed, when it's always shifted to serve someone's interests. That ad making you feel inadequate? The politician framing opponents as evil? They're using the same psychological levers religion once did. Who benefits from what you believe is right? If it's corporations, political parties, or social media algorithms, you've found modern slave morality. Nietzsche gives you permission to reject prefabricated values. Are you ready to reclaim your right to choose what is right? Imagine a well-lit path emerging from darkness. The greatest threat to control is a mind that dares to think for itself. If anything in this video stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Reflect, question, create. You were not born to obey. You were born to choose. I'll see you in the next exploration. Until then, stay unchained.